They wheeled me into surgery while my son-in-law was already inside my office, transferring my patent. He believed anesthesia meant I couldn't stop him. He never read paragraph 12. Welcome to Men's True Revenge Stories. Grab your snacks, sit back, and remember, the people in this story had every chance to do the right thing. They just chose the wrong one. Like and subscribe. My name is Silas Sterling. I am 72 years old. I'm a theoretical physicist and the founder of Sterling Nano-Systems. For 45 years, I've lived in the basement of reality. I understand the mathematics of subatomic particles. I understand how to map neural pathways. I understand that a single misplaced line of code can turn a breakthrough into a catastrophic failure. I also understand that greed is the most predictable variable in human nature. I spent 12 years developing the Neural Integration Core, the NIC. It is a $50 million piece of intellectual property that allows prosthetic limbs to feel texture, heat, and pressure with 98% accuracy. It is the skeleton of the future of human recovery. I remember the first prototype. It was a tangle of wires and silicon that cost me 3 years of sleepless nights and a mild stroke in 2014. I touched the microprocessors. I checked every neural shunt. I calibrated the feedback loops until my eyes bled from the screen glare. I taught Lucas everything he knows about the business side of Sterling Nano-Systems. I thought I was teaching a successor. I was actually teaching a scavenger. I showed him how to court investors, telling him that a man's reputation is his most valuable currency. I didn't realize that while I was teaching him how to build a company, he was learning how to strip it for parts. He was measuring the drapes before I had even finished building the walls. He was salivating over the licensing revenue while I was still obsessing over the synaptic delay. I didn't see the hunger. I saw a hard worker. That was the first flaw in my own internal architecture, a flaw I would soon have to rectify with a structural demolition. I live in a high-tech experimental residence in Palo Alto. The walls are glass. The security is biometric. The air is purified to laboratory standards. I built this life for my late wife, Miriam. She passed away 5 years ago, leaving me with a daughter who saw my brilliance as a retirement fund and a son-in-law who saw my lab as his personal ATM. They saw me as the old man who forgot where he put his keys. Lucas saw my surgery as a biological liquidation event. He saw it as a moment when the NIC would change hands while my hands were being held down by surgeons. I didn't know yet that my recovery would be the definitive audit of his morality. 3 months before the surgery, I had updated my intellectual property protection protocol. I didn't know yet that the server in Zurich would trigger my paragraph 12 clause before I even woke up in the ICU. I didn't know yet that the forged transfer documents Lucas signed would become his federal arrest warrant. I am a physicist. I don't build systems that fail, and I don't let parasites hijack the neural core of my legacy. Paragraph 12 of my intellectual property trust was the ghost in my machine. It meant that no transfer of rights could legally exist without my live, real-time biometric confirmation from my private server. Lucas believed he was signing my retirement. I didn't know yet that he had already signed his own federal indictment. The foundation of his new life was built on a breach of the very code he tried to steal. And I was about to trigger the structural collapse. On June 12th, the day of the procedure, Lucas arrived at 6 a.m. He brought my daughter Chloe. She wouldn't look me in the eye. She was holding her 4th designer bag of the month, her hands trembling as she adjusted her sunglasses in the sterile glare of the pre-op room. Nurse Sarah looked at Lucas's paperwork twice before handing it back to him. She noticed his hand was shaking more than the patient's. She saw the hunger, but she remained silent. For now. "Dad," Lucas said, leaning over my bed. His breath smelled of expensive peppermint and cheap desperation. "The board is nervous about the NIC licensing deal. Global Dynamics needs a signature before the end of the quarter. They're threatening to pull the Series B funding if there's any ambiguity in the leadership." If you're incapacitated for 3 weeks, we lose the $50 million valuation. I have the transfer documents here, just a temporary stewardship protocol to keep the company stable while you're under. Chloe agrees. We talked about it all night. It's for the best, Dad. I looked at my son-in-law. I looked at the digital pad in his hand. The screen was glowing with an artificial, sterile light. I saw the hunger in his eyes, but I missed the forged power of attorney hidden in his briefcase. I didn't see the way Chloe's hand was gripping her bag until her knuckles were white. I wanted to believe they were protecting my life. I wanted to believe that the foundation of our family was as solid as the neural systems I designed. I signed the digital pad at 7:30 a.m. I was already on a mild sedative. My hand was heavy. The stylus felt like a lead pipe. The signature was distorted. A jagged, broken line that looked like a seismic reading of an earthquake about to happen. Chloe looked at the document. Then she looked at me, and she nodded to Lucas. That was my first mistake. Lucas believed sedation meant silence, but he would soon learn that my silence was the loudest weapon I had. It would also be Lucas's last successful maneuver. Within 10 minutes of my being rolled into the operating room, Lucas wasn't in the waiting area. He was in my private office at Sterling Nano-Systems. He had the master biometric override, the one I had given him for emergencies only 2 years ago. He used it to bypass the dual authentication servers. He uploaded a document titled Total Intellectual Property Transfer, Sterling to Vance Group LLC. He used my sedated signature. He used my digital identity to sell my life's work to himself for $1. I sat in a state of suspended animation for 8 hours. I listened to the beep of the machines, keeping my heart beating. I didn't know yet that every beep was a tick of the clock on Lucas's final hours of freedom. He won't even realize it's gone, Chloe whispered to Lucas on the phone from the hospital hallway. Chloe already knew about the transfer before the surgery. She didn't stop him. She just watched her own father go under, wondering how soon the checks would clear. The doctor says the post-op confusion is common. We'll tell him the deal fell through and the company was seized for debt. I wasn't confused. I was under. And a man under anesthesia has plenty of time to dream of the data he left behind. A physicist knows that energy cannot be destroyed, but only transferred. And I knew exactly what happens when you try to transfer power without a ground wire. You get a surge, and I was about to become the biggest surge Lucas had ever felt. That night, while I was stable but unconscious, I triggered the paragraph 12 countermeasure, a secret script hidden in the subdirectory of the NIC's neural firmware, a script that looked for 2 variables. 1, a transfer of IP. 2, a lack of my real-time biometric confirmation. If the transfer wasn't confirmed by a live biometric scan within 4 hours, the NIC began to encrypt its core. If the transfer occurred while my heart rate was monitored as under medical sedation via my linked specialized medical smartwatch, paragraph 12 triggered the reversion clause. I was building a digital trapdoor that went as deep as the NIC's source code. If they wanted to treat my surgery as an exit strategy, I would treat their heist as a system-wide failure. He thought recovery meant weakness. He believed a heart bypass surgery was a curtain call on my intellect. He didn't realize that a physicist's mind doesn't shut down under anesthesia. It simply recalibrates the variables. I woke up on June 15th. The hospital room was quiet. Too quiet. My regular nurse, Sarah, wasn't there. Instead, a security guard Lucas had hired was sitting by the door. "Where's my phone?" I asked. My voice was a dry rasp, a physicist's rasp. "Mr. Thorne said no electronics for 48 hours, the guard said. "Doctor's orders." It wasn't the doctor's orders. It was Lucas's blackout. He was currently at the Global Dynamics headquarters in New York. And he was celebrating the Sterling-Vance merger. He was drinking $2,000 scotch and telling the board that Silas Sterling had willingly retired due to cognitive decline. I struggled out of the hospital bed at 3 a.m. My chest felt like it had been held together with industrial staples. The pain was a sharp diagnostic reminder that I was still alive. I found a tablet in the nurse's station while the guard was in the bathroom. The hospital Wi-Fi was slow, but the Sterling servers are optimized for high-latency environments. I logged into my secure cloud. "Access denied," the screen flashed in bright red letters. "Sterling Silas, reason, personnel deactivation. Security clearance revoked, corporate access terminated." I didn't scream. I didn't call the police. There I sat on a plastic chair and watched my life being deleted from the digital world. I watched as the Vance Group LLC replaced my name on the Sterling Patent Registry. I watched as the shell company Lucas had created 6 months ago swallowed 45 years of my intellectual labor. From my hospital bed, I made one call. I called Victor Thorne. Victor has been my legal shadow for 30 years. He is 71 years old and has the emotional range of a lead-lined bunker. "Victor," I said. "He took the NIC. "Silas," Victor replied. "He didn't just take the NIC, he took the house, the accounts, and the lab. He filed a cognitive assessment signed by Dr. Miller, the one he recommended. He claims you signed over the IP assignment during a period of lucidity before the surgery. The SEC has already issued a temporary trading permit for the new leadership." "He never read paragraph 12, did he?" I asked. "He didn't," Victor said. "He thinks he's playing checkers. He doesn't know you built the board. And he currently has 20 investors waiting for a demo of the source code in 48 hours. They've already committed $50 million based on the Vance leadership model. He's hosting a celebration dinner tonight at the club. Let him prepare the demo," I said. "Let him order the expensive champagne. I want him to stand in front of the world and show them exactly what he stole. I want him to feel the structure of his life collapse while he's on the podium. Victor, I want the behavioral reversion filing ready by 9 a.m. New York time." I didn't sign the patent assignment that day, but I didn't say no. I went back to my hospital bed. The pain in my chest was gone. It had been replaced by the cold, calculated hum of a machine being restarted. I didn't know yet that the demo would be the trigger for the reversal. I just knew that a house built on sand can't support a $50 million weight. On June 22nd, Silas Sterling, the man who supposedly had cognitive decline, walked into the Sterling Nano-Systems boardroom. I wasn't wearing a hospital gown. I was wearing a charcoal wool suit that cost more than Lucas's first car. I was carrying a vintage leather briefcase. Lucas was standing at the head of the table. He was wearing a brand new Rolex. Chloe was sitting by his side, typing on a platinum-plated laptop. They were surrounded by 12 of the most powerful tech investors in Silicon Valley. "Silas," Lucas said. His voice was a thin, panicked squeak. "What are you doing here? You're supposed to be in recovery in Mendocino." "I recovered faster than your morality, Lucas," I said. "I heard there was a demo of my NIC core. I wanted to see how the new president handles the firmware. The IP transfer is legal." "Silas," Lucas hissed, leaning over the table. "The signatures are certified. The IP is owned by Vance Group LLC. You are a consultant now, at best." "Then show them the NIC, Lucas," I said. The NIC allowed amputees to feel again. It was a $50 million miracle that Lucas was about to turn into a social execution. "Show them the breakthrough." Lucas turned to the large screen. He pulled up the source code for the neural integration core. He was smirking, his fingers dancing across the keys with the confidence of a man who thinks he's already cashed the check. "This," Lucas announced to the room, "is the end of the Silas Sterling era and the beginning of the Vance global future." He typed in his master admin password. The screen flashed, "Biometric sync required." "That's new," Lucas whispered. He pressed his thumb against the sensor. Sync failed." He tried again. He wiped his thumb on his $60 silk tie. "Sync failed. Reason, unauthorized life state." "What is this?" one of the investors, a man named Henderson, asked. Henderson was a venture capitalist who had the patience of a hungry shark. "Lucas, You told us you had full control of the core. I do, Lucas yelled. His voice was climbing an octave with every second. It's just a security latch, probably a leftover from the old man's paranoia. It's not a glitch, Lucas, I said, stepping from the shadows at the back of the room. The sound of my voice was like a frequency Lucas hadn't prepared for. He spun around, his face the color of industrial bleach. It's paragraph 12. Paragraph 12 meant my patent could never legally change hands while I was under sedation. Paragraph 12 of the Sterling Intellectual Property Trust states that any transfer of core firmware occurring while the transferor is in a sedated life state is automatically suspended for a secondary verification. You were under for 8 hours, Lucas, I said, walking toward the head of the table. The investors watched me as if I were a ghost returning to reclaim my grave. No one in the room touched their laptops after that. The silence was so heavy you could hear the air conditioning hum in the ceiling. During which time, the system detected a transfer attempt from an unauthorized biometric hub. Your office. Since I was unconscious and unable to verify the transfer, the NIC activated its secondary security protocol. It didn't just lock you out. It converted the source code into a nonlinear encryption that can only be unlocked by a real-time high-stress ECG reading from my actual heart. I am the key, Lucas, and I'm currently very displeased with the locks. Lucas's face turned the color of a burnt-out circuit board. He tried to swipe his phone, looking for the Vance LLC bank balance to show the investors. Rejected, the screen flashed. Reason, asset seizure pending. Security protocol, Delta 9 activated. I have already filed a federal report for senior exploitation and identity theft, I said. And I've already alerted the SEC that your investment round was based on a fraudulent claim of ownership. Victor Thorne is currently in the lobby with the SEC Enforcement Division. Lucas, Chloe said, her voice trembling. She was looking at her husband as if he were a stranger. What did you do with the investment capital? My account isn't working either. I moved it to the Vance LLC account, Lucas stammered. The Vance LLC account that was frozen at 9 a.m. this morning because it was built on a fraudulent asset, I asked. The account that currently has a balance of $0 and 3 federal holds? The board members stopped typing. The screens on the wall went black, one by one, triggered by the Zurich deauthorization script. My heartbeat authentication had returned, and Lucas stopped speaking mid-sentence. And his mouth was open, but the power had been cut. I wasn't just back in control, I was the entire circuit. I watched as the investors stood up. They didn't say goodbye, they didn't offer to help. They gathered their coats with the clinical efficiency of scavengers who realized the carcass was still alive. I watched as the $50 million valuation evaporated in the stale air of a boardroom that Lucas thought he owned. He was no longer the king of Silicon Valley. He was just a man in a borrowed suit standing in a room full of ghosts. Lucas didn't leave immediately. He locked himself in his office for 6 hours. I sat in the break room with Sarah and Victor. We watched the tech news crawl on the wall monitor. Sterling Nano-Systems IPO halted amidst fraud allegations. Lucas's personal credit cards, the ones he had used to buy the Rolex and the New York Scotch, were rejected at 2 p.m. He tried to order a car home. The account was frozen. He had to call his wife, Chloe, to come pick him up. She didn't answer. I had already informed her that her trust fund was contingent on her full cooperation with the federal investigation. She chose her inheritance over her husband, a structural choice I had predicted 10 years ago. By day 3 of the legal fallout, Lucas escalated. He contacted my late wife's brother, Robert. He told him I was suffering from post-operative delirium. He told him I was destroying the family legacy out of spite. Robert called me that night. Silas, Lucas says you're not thinking straight. He says you're hurting Chloe. I'm thinking with the precision of a laser, Robert, I said. I'm currently looking at a federal indictment for Lucas Vance. I'm looking at a $50 million patent that Lucas tried to sell while I was being cut open on an operating table. The silence from the other end of the line was heavy. "I will call Lucas," Robert said, "and I will tell him to hire a public defender." She did, and Lucas stopped calling the relatives. The news spread through the Silicon Valley CEO circles by sunset. I am a member of the Founders Circle. Lucas has spent the last 5 years trying to get an invitation to the annual Founders Gala, the most exclusive event in the tech world. He had been telling everyone that he was the visionary successor of Silas Sterling. He had been signing for lunch on my member number for 6 months. I received the invoice for a $10,000 dinner he hosted for his merger team at the club's private terrace. I called the club manager, Andre. "Andre, revoke the guest privileges for Lucas Vance and Chloe Sterling. Inform the security team that they are no longer authorized to enter the grounds. And inform the waitstaff that any charges made to my account in the last 90 days are being disputed as unauthorized commercial fraud." Lucas was at the club bar at 5 p.m., trying to network his way out of the crisis. He was halfway through a $500 bottle of vintage Cabernet. He was telling a potential investor that the glitch in the boardroom was actually a strategic security test he had designed. The notification hit his phone. His card was declined. The bartender, a man named Marcus, who I've tipped for 20 years, didn't look away. He simply pulled the bottle back. "I'm sorry, Mr. Vance, this card is no longer authorized on the Sterling account." Everyone in the lounge saw the rejection. Everyone saw Lucas fumble through his pockets, trying to find a personal credit card. He found his Platinum Amex, the one I had given him for travel and networking. "Rejected," the machine chirped. The manager, Andre, arrived with 2 security guards. "Mr. Vance, I'm afraid we have to ask you to leave the premises. Your membership has been terminated for cause." They walked him out through the main lobby while the industry's titans watched. He wasn't the successor. He was the intruder who had been escorted to the street. His visionary CEO status collapsed in front of the very people he had tried to impress. He stood on the sidewalk in Palo Alto, clutching his briefcase, while the valet brought around his Bentley, the one that was currently being registered as a company asset I was reclaiming. "I'm sorry, sir," the valet said, holding the keys out to me as I pulled up in my old Cadillac. "This vehicle is now listed as a Sterling corporate recovery. The micro-humiliations were the internal supports being pulled one by one. I wanted him to feel every inch of the fall. I wanted him to understand that a man who steals a crown doesn't get to wear it in public. The micro-humiliations didn't stop there. At exactly 4:15 p.m., a 3-man team from the SEC arrived at Lucas's Vance Group office. I instructed the security guard to let them through. They met Lucas in the hallway. They were looking for the capital asset report he had prepared based on the NIC's equity. I handed them the paragraph 12 audit instead. I watched as they realized Lucas had tried to sell technology he didn't legally possess. One of them simply looked at Lucas with pity. "He told us you were mentally incompetent, Silas," the investigator said. "He told us the company was under his stewardship." They left within 20 minutes, taking Lucas's laptops and his Rolex with them. On day 7, I received an email from Victor Thorne. Dear subject, asset reversion complete. The federal court had accepted the filing. The medical sedation forgery had been documented by the hospital's own digital logging system. Under the terms of paragraph 12, the Vance Group LLC was declared null and void. The patent was back in my hands, and Lucas was now officially a liability. That evening, I received a text from Lucas. "Silas, I was doing it for the company. We can't let $50 million wait for a heart valve." I replied with 2 words. My heart, that was all. On July 4th, Independence Day, Victor Thorne arrived at my lab. He was carrying a black briefcase. He was followed by 2 men in suits from the Department of Justice. Lucas and Chloe were in the kitchen of my Palo Alto house. They were eating takeout. They looked like refugees in a house they thought they had inherited. "Lucas," Victor said, placing the briefcase on the solid glass table, "you are no longer the CEO of Vance Group LLC. In fact, Vance Group LLC no longer exists. Lucas laughed, but it was a dry, hollow sound. I have the transfer documents. The court will see the signature. The court has already seen the hospital's biometric log, Lucas, Victor said, and Silas signed a paragraph 12 rider 20 years ago. And the SEC signed an asset seizure report. The patent has reverted. Victor pulled out the IP registry printout. Lucas's name was gone. The owner was listed as the Silas Sterling Legacy Trust. You have 60 minutes to pack your things, I said. The movers are here to assist with anything Lucas bought with company funds. Chloe started to cry. Dad, please. Lucas was just trying to secure our future. It's not about the future, Chloe, I said. It's about the physics of betrayal. You tried to build your luxury on a foundation of my vulnerability, and the structure has failed. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling glass. I watched Lucas start to pack his designer suits into a garbage bag. The $5,000 blazers looked pathetic now. The removal was loud. The federal agents hauled Lucas's Vance Group server racks out of my basement lab. They scraped the floor. They made a mess. Lucas sat on the stairs, holding his head in his hands. I have $50 million in personal guarantees on that investment round, Silas, Lucas whispered. If I don't deliver the source code, I'm going to prison for securities fraud. That sounds like a structural flaw in your integrity, I said. At 5:30 p.m., the doorbell rang again. It was the FBI's corporate fraud division. They weren't there for a standby. Lucas stood up. What now? Mr. Lucas Vance? The lead agent asked. We have a warrant for your arrest. Corporate espionage, senior exploitation, and bank fraud involving a forged intellectual property transfer. Lucas froze. He didn't move for 10 seconds. The Silicon Valley visionary persona vanished. What was left was a frightened child in an expensive house. The investment round was a Ponzi scheme, the agent said. You used your father-in-law's medical condition to bait the capital. I looked at Lucas. I hadn't known about the investment baiting. Victor had found it that morning. You tried to reboot my life while I was offline, I said, so I deleted your career first. They handcuffed him in my library. The metallic click of the cuffs was the only frequency in the room. Nurse Sarah was still standing by the door when the agents arrived. She handed Victor a flash drive, the hospital's internal CCTV showing Lucas and Chloe forging the digital agreement while I was in prep. She had been watching the entire time. She was the ghost in the ward who didn't miss a single variable. They handcuffed him in the same room where he had stood and told me I was cognitively failing. They handcuffed him in the same room where he had toasted his merger with my stolen patents. I watched. I didn't feel anger. I felt the clinical detachment of a scientist observing a failed experiment. I felt the satisfaction of a bridge engineer watching a poorly designed structure finally reach its breaking point. The house staff, my 2 security analysts and the lab assistant who had worked for me for 15 years, were standing in the hallway. They had spent the last 3 days being threatened with termination by Lucas. They watched silently. They already knew what he had done. They followed him with their eyes as the agents led him down the hall. One of the gardeners, Jorge, even held the door open with a quiet, polite nod that said, "Good riddance." Chloe walked behind them, carrying her duty-free shopping bags and a small suitcase. She was wearing her $1,000 sunglasses to hide the tears she was finally crying. Tears of frustration, not regret. She didn't look at me once. She didn't look at the house. She was already looking at her phone, probably checking the balance of the hidden account I had already liquidated 2 hours ago, probably looking for a new partner who didn't come with a federal indictment. She is my daughter, but she is also a variable I have permanently removed from the equation. She is a structural error I have decided not to repair. I have archived her. I have moved her files to a drive I will never open again. The Palo Alto moon was high and cold when they finally loaded Lucas into the back of the black SUV. The flashing lights of the police cruisers were the last fireworks he would see for a long time. He looked through the glass. his face a distorted reflection of a man who had tried to build a mountain out of stolen bricks. The mountain had finally shifted. The weight had finally settled, and Lucas Vance was officially underground. The front door closed at 6:45 p.m. The fireworks for the 4th of July were beginning to explode over the bay. The air was crisp and smelled of gunpowder and ocean salt. I walked through my lab. It was empty. Lucas's servers were gone. His Vance branding was gone. The movers were bringing my archives back in from the secure storage. I found my original notebook. I ran my hand over the handwritten calculations for paragraph 12. The ink was faded, but the logic was solid. It belonged here. Paragraph 12 had done its job. The green light of the biometric scanner flashed. Sterling Silas, access permanent. I contacted Victor one last time. File the permanent restraining order, Victor. And freeze the remainder of the trust distributions for Chloe. She can apply for them when she reaches age 50. If she proves she has held a steady job for 10 years. Understood, Silas, Victor said. The core is yours, permanently. I walked past the front door slowly and locked it behind me without looking back. I didn't need to see Lucas in the back of that SUV. I didn't need to see the Porsche being towed. I knew the load had been redistributed. I sat at my terminal. I opened a fresh sheet of code. I picked up a pen. The system recognized my heartbeat again. The green light of the scanner was the sound of my life returning to its proper frequency. Paragraph 12 had functioned with zero latency. The foundation had held. The house had never been this quiet before. The ledger was perfectly balanced. By sunset, the story had reached the front page of the Wall Street Journal's tech section. Physicist Silas Sterling resumes control of empire after attempted coup. The legal details of the paragraph 12 reversion were disseminated to every venture capitalist in the valley. Lucas's investors, already terrified, pulled their remaining lines of credit within 48 hours. His reputation in the valley was not just damaged, it was excavated. He was officially the son-in-law who tried to steal $50 million while his father-in-law was in surgery. That is a label you don't wash off in a desert like Silicon Valley. The story became a cautionary tale in the startup community. Sterling's reversion, they started calling it. The law that says the source code must always outlast the parasites. I found a small ceramic shard in the lab yesterday. It was a piece of a coffee mug Miriam and I bought 40 years ago. I held it in my palm. It was smooth, polished by time and the clinical air of the lab. It was a fragment of a memory Lucas had tried to pave over with titanium and hubris. I didn't throw it away. I placed it on my monitor. A reminder that real structures are built on moments, not just materials. I heard from Robert that Chloe had moved in with a friend in Los Angeles. The designer bags had been sold on eBay at 10:15 a.m. on Tuesday, right in front of the local juice bar where she used to post her morning selfies. The humiliation was documented by at least 3 people who recognized her. She had built her image on a foundation of my credit. And when I pulled the support beams, her social standing went into a free fall. She is no longer heiress Chloe. She is a woman selling her past to pay for her present. The vellum of her life has been torn. Lucas is currently awaiting his first hearing in the Northern District of California. The DOJ has a very long memory for senior exploitation cases involving federal patents. The lead prosecutor has already requested the maximum sentencing. Apparently, the combination of tech visionary and greedy forger makes for an excellent court narrative. Victor Thorne is providing every document, every forged signature, every unauthorized credit draw. I am a physicist. I'm providing the blueprints for his conviction. I'm documenting the failure points. I'm ensuring the structure of his defense is as hollow as the shell company he tried to build. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling glass one last time before bed. The bay moon was high and cold. The Golden Gate Bridge was a dark silhouette against the sky. The house felt solid under my feet. The foundation had held. A house built on truth doesn't collapse when tested. The Sterling estate was once again a sanctuary. Join our community for more unfiltered family stories.